This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
New residency requirements for the County Commission, the charges against FedEx, and more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists to discuss some recent news. We'll start with Andrew Douglas from Action News 5. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Les Smith, Fox 13 News. Thank you for being here again.
Good to be back.
And Jackson Baker from the Memphis Flyer. Jackson, we'll start with you and the County Commission. A couple things, big events at the County Commission. First was the anti-discrimination resolution, also the residency requirements I mentioned. Let's start with the anti-discrimination resolution that did not pass.
In 2009, the County Commission tried to pass an ordinance. Steve Mulroy was the sponsor. He usually brings the liberal legislation. And it was watered down to a resolution. Originally, it had language specific to sexual orientation. That was taken out in the debate. And they had the phrase non-merit. People cannot be discriminated against for non-merit reasons. And that lasted until this year when Mulroy took another go at it because the City Council had meanwhile passed a stronger resolution. This one naming sexual orientation transgendered people. And so this was a mirror version of the City Council resolution, and actually the same thing that had been proposed in 2009. They had great prospects of passing it. Mulroy was again the sponsor, and the debate raged across all kinds of terrain. The opponents of the resolution pointed out, look, the legislature, in 2011, they passed a bill prohibiting localities from having discrimination measures that were stronger than, different than the state regulations. And that squelched a Nashville ordinance at the time. It also squelched attempts back then to have a stronger resolution locally. City Council went ahead and did it anyhow. It's a resolution, not an ordinance, so they thought they could get away with it. Probably could have, probably will. The commission could have too, but that non-merit argument was brought out. And also, the opponent said, we're already banning everything because of the language non-merit. And in the final analysis, it failed because 2 Democrats were not on board. It would have made it work. It had 6 votes needed, 7. Henry Brooks, having won her fight to stay on the commission, has not been back since she won that fight. And she was gone. And James Harvey, who has decided he's a crypto Republican or something and wants to run for mayor next year, he thinks he's going to do well there.
And he did not vote against it.
He did not. He abstained.
He abstained.
So that killed.
So the critics would say of the proposal would say it's already covered. Other folks said we want to make it explicit. I mean, it was that simple.
That was the argument that fell when the city passed their ordinance. The argument was that, well, we've never gotten a case of discrimination, so why should we even have this in place?
Right.
And that was kind of the same feeling over there, especially with Terry Rowland and his arguments against it, that, hey, we're fine. It's not been challenged. It's not going to be challenged, whatever, right. So why should we do something as stringent as this?
Terry Rowland had the argument that God had told him not to do.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it, okay, if there's something on the books where the county attorney says, look, this covers everybody, I think if you were to poll Shelby County residents and say, what are your top priorities for the county commission? You know, perhaps jobs, taxes, health care, safety would probably be above a more specific anti-discrimination ordinance.
Yes.
You know, hopefully there'll be other issues.
Hopefully there will be other issues.
Yeah, an action that did pass was where there was not clarity, and there now is more clarity, is this whole issue of residency. And you mentioned Henry Brooks. Also, Ford was challenged on his residency. And this was one, we talked about this a month ago. Yeah. It just seems like it ought to be really clear. If you represented it, and I'm just being naive.
Where do you live?
Where do you live? Do you live in your district? I mean, I know where I live. I just know where I live.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, and I know that that's in a district, and if I were to represent that district, I know where I live. But there seems a lot of vagaries about where you might live. And even with the new rules, it allows for some gray areas.
Well,
it's really
it may allow for gray areas, but the fact is, Chancellor Kenny Armstrong, when he ruled against the commission because the county attorney had declared the seat vacant of Henry Brooks for not living in her district, he said the county commission can make that decision. Now, Commissioner Walter Bailey, who was a very constructive member of the commission, nevertheless has lost sight of what the chancellor actually said, and he tried to maintain what you're saying, that, you know, we can't make those kinds of rules. They can make those kinds of rules. The commission did make those kinds of rules this time.
Well, and part of what happened in the Henry Brooks case, that the county attorney concluded that Brooks did not live in the district she represents, but her office could not conclude where she currently lives.
Right.
And so now one of the requirements is you have to come forward with a variety of things: a lease rental agreement, Memphis Light Gather bill, property tax receipt, gun bill, credit card, but some kind of proof of where you live. And then in the case of Ford Ingram, the county attorney concluded that he probably, and my word, not hers, probably lived in his district, but his home had not had utilities for 2 years.
It's amazing to me that we're actually having this discussion, Eric, because I'm with you. It's very cut and dry. Does the person live there or not? When we look at elected leaders, we look at someone that maybe has the same values, the same ideas, but now we have to look at their application to see if they have that integrity of, yes, they are who they are, where they live is where they live. If someone doesn't have utilities for 2 years, they don't live there.
It's hard to believe they
You're
live.
off. Next time.
You're asking voters to specifically stay where they live, but you wouldn't ask that of
Right, because
elected officials.
we're worried about voter fraud, and we're worried about all this identification. It's got to be a photo identification.
Commissioner fraud is okay.
Commissioner fraud is okay.
And school children have to have the same kind of identification when they're
That's
assigned.
a great point. That's a great point. To be in the district and be in the school.
And really, the new regulations were built more on that than anything else.
Right. Now, just a minute left on this segment. This is a commission. A number of folks are leaving. They are term limited out. You were talking a little bit about that. Just some thoughts on some of the people leaving and some of them coming in.
You know, you could break down the people who served the 2 terms, 8 years, as before Terry Rowland and after Terry Rowland, because that's what it amounted to. And then, of course, the 2010 issue of the schools in the city merger, county merger, that just tore them apart. And it also gave people there room for, or I guess impetus for personal attacks, which got really nasty. But still in all, they were fun to cover. I mean, they were just a fun
and
group
I think
of media to cover.
I mean, 2 substantial changes. One is that the districts have changed. We now go back, without getting back in the residency thing, we don't have as many I'll screw this up, but it's tighter districts, narrow districts, single member districts, which is a really huge change for the commission. And the other is that they would argue that the county budget is in much better shape than it was 8, 12, 16 years ago, and so on. That a lot of progress was made, a lot of debt was refinanced and paid down. And so
there were some
the
positive
circus,
things.
the political circus aside, a whole lot of substantive things did happen over the course of the last 8 years.
Let me say 10 seconds for a scoop here, because you were talking about people leaving the commission. Mike Ritz was certainly one of those. He was a Republican who always voted with the Democrats on school issues. He has moved into Memphis. He's going to run for the city council next year. Okay. Wow. He's going all the way over.
Right.
Stuff.
All right.
Well, let's move on to other politics. This on the City of Memphis side, and I'll turn to you, Andrew. A half-cent sales tax came up. What happened? There's a proposal to put it on the ballot in November by Janice Fuller, and all this against the backdrop of spending cuts, healthcare cuts, pension cuts.
Right. So the healthcare coverage. I mean, we all know we've been covering this for weeks and for months. The healthcare coverage issue with the blue flu, which is the sick out for the police in protest of some health care benefits and coverage, and the red rash, which is the firefighters, their jurisdiction and what they're doing, was all in protest of health care and health benefits. Okay, so the city council and city leaders decided, what should we do? How do we fix this? How do we make everybody happy? We all want to get along, right? We all want to make this happy. All right, so what are some of the options? Well, an option that came on the table is another proposal for a half-cent sales tax. But if you look, you don't have to look that far to know that a half-cent sales tax has failed the past 2 times with lots of funding behind it, by the way. Here's a 3rd time that may happen. Councilwoman Janice Fuller is pushing an idea to maybe have another referendum on the ballot next cycle. Everything suggests it's going to fail again.
Right. Yeah, and just technically it won't be on the November ballot unless there wasn't enough time to get the ratings and all the proper notice and so on. One would assume it'll probably come back up. The proposal is a half-cent increase, 80% of the revenue going to police and fire services to reverse the health care cuts. The remaining 20% would go to the city's debt service, a total of $47 million. I've heard this before. Whatever you think of the merits of that, I'm not being cynical about it, but
No.
it was pre-K and it was education funding,
Educational
and the voters
funding.
in the city of Memphis said we're paying. We don't want to increase taxes.
There's not enough money involved here to fill either problem.
Yeah,
I mean,
right,
Yeah.
right.
and especially with the pension. I mean, you're talking about $47 million they would generate, but that's not enough to
Right.
I want to say, if there is a chance for this to pass, I agree with you. We should all be pessimistic about that.
Right.
The adherents should be. But the difference is, those that failed were education oriented. This is police and fire. This is public safety.
Okay, and they've certainly shown an ability to rally a lot of emotion and people to turn out on social media and at city council meetings and so on and so forth. So maybe if they get it on the ballot, they can rally that support.
A little more of an edge,
And
I
people,
think.
it is a different vote. Those were 2 education votes, and maybe people said, "Hey, we're already spending enough on education."
Right.
This is different. So
But it's much easier to say, yeah, we're behind the police officers, we're behind the fire department. Wait a second, you're going to raise my taxes on my home every
Right.
year? I'm not sure. Your benefits are pretty good. I don't know. Let me
Right.
think about this.
And on this front, I'll put you on the spot, I think, Les, here. On this front of the ongoing debate about pension and health benefits and so on, we've had the union leaders on, we've had all kinds of people on talking about it. Wharton made an appearance at City Council recently. He'd been criticized for not being there. Jim Strickland and Myron Lowry both sort of implored him in writing and to come and hear some of these complaints.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that? Because when he was on the show recently and talked about, hey, I meet with all these people privately. I don't want to go into that public forum. It's too much of a circus. My words, not his. But that was my impression that he gave us. But this time he came.
He
to the
came, he
circus.
saw, he left quietly. I mean,
He saw, but did not speak.
he does, but the whole thing, watching them in committee on Tuesday, and the plan presented by the Firefighters Association, which is backed kind of by the Police Association, and then for it to get shot down by someone from Human Resources saying, Cigna says this isn't going to work, you're not going to do anything. Okay. And it just started the whole cycle all over again. This is this whole situation, a matter of trust. Right. And the bottom line is nobody trusts anybody.
Right. Yeah.
Whose figures, who's this or who's that. It's just so sad and so frustrating to watch sometimes.
Right. We'll move on to the next big topic, 2 stories interrelated, and I'll turn to you, Les, on FedEx. Hit with some charges by the federal government. In summary, that the FedEx has been shipping drugs from illegal pharmacies, online pharmacies, prescription drugs. There's a teenager who died that was highlighted in the indictment. They were not blaming FedEx.
We're not blaming
and
FedEx
I need to make sure I say again
right.
and over, FedEx denies these charges, plans to fight these charges in court. But they are, I think, $1.6 billion is the fine that's being tossed around.
Is the fine that's being tossed around. This is serious business. Because there are people who think, well, the feds are just poking around. Do they have an indictment? Indictments are real things. They're not going to go after a company as huge and as prolific as Federal Express if they don't have anything behind it to do it. And this money laundering situation that they brought up, I think last week they revealed this money laundering has been added to it. These are serious charges, right. Especially if FedEx executives were in on this and knew about it. I tell you, I think there's stuff here to be worried about.
Well, and UPS, the other big shipping company, reached an agreement with the Justice Department for similar charges. They forfeited $40 million. Google, which was running ads for online pharmacies, they agreed to pay $500 million to the Justice Department rather than going to court. I mean, it's a big, big deal. But Jackson, I mean, it's FedEx, it's Memphis. It's not just the largest employer. It is part of the fabric of the city. It's part of the story of the city. I mean, Fred Smith from FedEx founds the company here. I mean, so it's I'm not looking for sympathy. It's a tough story to cover, I think, because everyone probably at this table knows someone.
Right.
Talk about that for a second. Just the notion of FedEx as a corporate citizen that most people view as a really positive.
Well, first of all, FedEx will survive this.
Sure.
They are luckily one of the huge mega corporations that has some money to spend on fines if it comes to it. But what I want to talk about is the fact that there are other big corporations involved here too. Yes, there's some criminal activity that people are worried about. There's also big pharma who are really interested in shutting down the competition. That's something that's involved here. And let's face it, this has been a moneymaker for FedEx and UPS. That's going to change a lot of social habits as well.
Right.
A lot of people are dependent on online
Right.
pharmacies.
I mean, some of the argument is that some of these online pharmacies are, in the worst case, the shady ones are selling. They say it's drug X and it's really not. It might be something dangerous, or they're selling, Viagra and all those sorts of things, or they're selling, painkillers and really dangerous or problematic stuff. The other argument is that some of these Canadian pharmacies, which I know the Google was involved in, they sold quality drugs.
They're underselling.
They were cheaper than what you could get in the United States. So senior citizens, people with low insurance, saying, "Hey, I'm just trying to get this at an affordable price." And so there is. I think you're right that there's a bigger social issue about how pharma and how pharmaceuticals.
It has to do with our ongoing medical debate, still unresolved.
Right.
To get drug prices down.
I'll read too. Just FedEx has said a lot. They've said that they're just protesting charges. I'll read a little bit from a Wall Street Journal being. Editorial, very critical of the Justice Department, saying FedEx had no way of knowing which pharmacies were violating the law by filing orders without valid prescriptions. Justice hasn't provided FedEx with a list of the pharmacies that were not valid, and even if employees of FedEx ripped open packages, they wouldn't be able to finger the contraband. The Wall Street Journal point, which they run two, it's worth people reading, is a kind of counterpoint to the accusations, because their point is FedEx is a business. They had no way of knowing what was in these packages, no way of knowing what was a valid pharmacy and what was not. Let's go on to politics now, and we're a couple weeks removed from an election, Jackson, that part of the headline on this is that the Democrats got trounced. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the thoughts on the election. The Democrats did get beat in the recent county election, because once again their candidates didn't measure up. That's to state the bald fact. That's it. With one exception, well, maybe a couple of exceptions. Cheyenne Johnson, who was reelected as assessor, was known to have done a good job. Her opponent was an unknown, so the voters made the wise decision. Let's go with the person who's done the job. Most of the Democrats were trying to get in. They didn't have a job record. But essentially, there is a problem inside the Democratic Party they're insisting on a loyalty test. Now, look, the Republican Party in Tennessee used to be the minority party. It is now the dominant party statewide. It wins elections in Shelby County without being dominant in numbers, and it does so because it has an open door policy. Come on in, Democrats. We've got room for you. We've got a big tent. The Democrats instead are insisting on the most binding rules. If you know a Democrat, if your sister once dated, know a Republican, your sister once dated one, it's almost that bad. Yeah. If you voted in too many Republican primaries, if you live out east, you got to vote in Republican primaries if you want to elect commissioners and so forth. Then you can't run on the Democratic ballot.
And some of this goes to the Joe Brown test. I mean, Joe Brown was on the ballot running against Amy Wyrick. Whatever you think of her, very widely respected among the legal and law enforcement community, a very serious person. And Joe Brown, I've used the word circus too many times, but Joe Brown's campaign turns into a bit of a circus. But there was a loyalty test there. Are you going to support that? That's our ticket. That's our big name person on the ticket.
Yeah, in 2010. When the Democrats went down county-wise, one of their people in a very memorable quote said, "Well, just hold your nose and vote for them." Saying that these candidates are really not all that great either. But this slate, as Jackson said, of candidates for the most part, with the exception of Cheyenne Johnson, of course, who won again, they were all shaky. And then you throw in the Joe Brown factor, the Henry Brooks self-implosion. And
Brooks was running for one of the court
Brooks was running for juvenile court clerk. You throw that in, and then this is all supposed to be headed up by young Brian Carson, who really didn't have, I don't think, the political chops to have been the party leader.
Right.
But he had to sit there and try to ramrod this whole thing, and I don't think he ever found the correct approach in which to do this. And I think that was the undoing.
I think we all agree here, better candidates equal better results. But I think it's not so much Democrats, it's both parties. You'll see this nationally. Whoever loses, whoever's on the losing end, they're looking for better candidates next election cycle. So this is a problem with the Republicans nationally. Sometimes those looking to be at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, they're looking for better candidates to get better results. And that'll be the test. President Obama, he won Shelby County in 2008. You mentioned the property assessor. That was another Democrat who won this last election cycle. I just think it has to come down to the candidate being better.
I think Republicans and the difference between them, Republicans are tunnel vision for victory. They get behind a candidate or behind an issue, and they are tunnel vision. You don't have to worry about them not coming out on election day. With Democrats, it's either got to be some hot candidate or it's got to be some issue that they're so revved up about doing to get them to even come out to vote. They'll give it lip service, but then on election day they don't show up.
And also there's a simple factor that's eternal. It precedes anything local. Incumbents tend to be favored. Unless they have done some misdeed on the job. And these incumbents have all been either nondescript or they've excelled.
Right.
There's no reason to.
There was no issue any of them any of the challengers could really get the incumbents
And also,
on.
I would say, so with Cheyenne Johnson, who's the assessor, and people don't think about the assessor, but it's a big job. It's a very important job.
Yeah.
She's done a lot to reach across. I don't know if it's across the aisle, but reach out to the business community. I mean, most people think about the assessor and the taxes they pay on their home, but the business community they work a lot with the assessor evaluations, and she's done. I think what I've heard is she's done a very good job working with the business community, which tends to vote Republican, and so has reached across the aisle in that sense. Right. You look at Wharton, for all the, his success as a politician, he's a lifelong Democrat, public defender, et cetera, but he has very strong hooks in the business community and with Republicans. And so where you had like the Joe Browns and the people who said, you're going to follow the company line, you're going to have that sort of, it's us or you're
get the highway, right?
They're not going to win in a county that the county or city is willing to vote Democratic, but not for people who have that kind of unitary sort of vote.
But those two candidates, Joe Brown and Henry Brooks, by themselves could have sunk the ticket. In addition to all these other factors, right. You cannot do what Joe Brown did: vilify your opponent, make slanderous remarks about her. Right. Her private life, which have no bearing in the reality. You cannot do what Henry Brooks said: insult Hispanics who are part of your electorate, and then pour water on
Get
the
in a fight in a parking lot.
Yeah,
here's what you got to do. Here's what you got to do. You got to recognize who the leaders of the party are. The leaders of the party is Steve Cohen, and really, to be honest about it, if Democrats want to revive themselves, they need some type of they have to realize and accept Steve Cohen is the star of the local Democratic Party. Get behind him.
Yeah. Well, one other interesting part, and I guess the full race isn't over, but Lee Harris beating Ophelia Ford. Yep. So that's a Democrat versus Democrat race. Mm-hmm. I think that district is going to go Democratic the way it's been redistricted in the general. But that was a moment where you said, look, the Ford name doesn't matter anymore. Right. The incumbency doesn't matter anymore. There's just, I'll be completely open here. There's just a really bad person, not a bad person, but a person who's not they're not going to work. They're not engaged in the issues. They've become kind of a sideshow. Lee Harris, you may not agree with him, but he's been on the show, he's been on city council. Lee has strong opinions. He's, engaged. He fought for that seat. And so for Democrats, you talk about Steve Cohen being the leader. Bill Dries, who couldn't be here today, had an interesting article about who are the future people. And he pointed to, some people point to Lee Harris and Van Turner, and some of the younger, mostly African-American folks gone to school. Lee Harris and Van both go to law school, come back, and they start at the bottom. Yeah. And that's an interesting point that Lee and Van both make is, don't come and run immediately against Steve Cohen. Pay your dues. Start at the city council, start at the school board, and work your way up. And it's an interesting point that Steve may be the leader, but the future are these younger people. I mean, that's just the case.
And the fact is, he's a very dynamic person. Lee Harris is very dynamic. And Ophelia Ford, it wasn't just that she didn't show up for work. When she did something embarrassing. So the Ford name can't conquer that, and incumbency can't conquer that.
Right.
I can't imagine how she could have won, really.
It's amazing to me that she got 8 years. Just being a political observer, watching her track record of not only her absence and her absences, but what she did when she did show up. And Democrats, every time I talk to them, they just were pleading for somebody to run against her. And anyone. And Lee Harris is someone who's sharp. He's got ideas. And even if you disagree with him, you know that he's passionate about what he believes. He's going to show up and he's going to put forth the best foot forward and move with it.
And the county commission, the new county commission, is going to afford people like Mr. Turner a a stand, a show place, a podium from which we can see if they're going to develop as leaders or not. You're going to have in that county commission, Walter Bailey will come back as Papa Bear, and then he's going to be surrounded by all these little cubs, and he's probably going to try to teach
Terry
them.
Rowland is going to be the statesman. He's already trying to be that.
That's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah.
And Terry Rowland has how much time left? Just a minute
One
left.
more term.
One more term,
Yeah.
4
Walter
more
Bailey.
years.
Walter Bailey, one more term, is that
Yeah.
correct?
Walter
Yeah.
Bailey, one more term.
And his second go-round.
I was talking to Terry on the phone the other day, and I had said something like, well, you know, the expected chairman is expected to be a Republican next year, since Harvey was a Democrat. And he said, you know, they're talking about Steve Baser. That's not necessarily so. And I said, oh, I understand that. Okay.
And so,
All right.
who is the next leader of the local Democratic Party? I mean, I assume that the Republicans, they're winning. They're not going to change a whole lot. And I guess we're just focusing on the Democrats because they seem a bit in disarray. Who's the future party
That's a
leader?
good question.
That is a good question.
If, you mean to lead the party as chairman or the
Locally,
figurehead?
yeah.
Figure-
Chairman,
well,
chairman.
the only person you can look at right now who is a consistent winner and has stature is Cohen.
Yeah.
As you said, Steve has not been particularly interested in that role. He's
Right.
unlike Harold Ford Sr., one of his predecessors in
Right.
Congress, but he may have to take it.
Yeah.
Somebody has to do it.
Because it's in shambles right now. And then you're going to have and we're not even talking about the who's going to fill Jim Kyle's seat, too.
Yeah.
Are we
right.
talking about that?
Well, we're running out of time, so we'll talk about that on a future
Okay.
show.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.